August 15th, this is Santa Barbara Entrepreneur visiting with Michael Crandell, CEO of Right Scale. And thank you so much for visiting with us.
Thank you, John.
So just jumping right into it, what age did you realize that you were going to be an entrepreneur?
That's an interesting question because I never really reached a certain age where I thought I'm an entrepreneur. I think, in fact, if you think about the root of where the concept or the word comes from, I think of entrepreneurship as making stuff happen, getting stuff done, opening doors. So I really think it's a core part of the human spirit for everyone, which just comes in varying degrees for us and may increase or decrease during our lifetime. So it really started to happen when I got into business and decided, hey, I can kind of start my own and I can go give it a shot. That's really how I thought about it. I got some funding and backing from my father who said, go off and do it now or you never will. I don't think that's necessarily true because I think you can do it at any age. But that's what he told me, and it created another ingredient, which is a little bit of concern or maybe fear.
Yeah.
Which is, okay, I better try this now. That was in my late 20s when that happened. But really, it's been kind of a continuum all the way along of, again, taking a risk, trying to get something done, trying to find a way to make something happen.
It sounds like one of the key factors, though, was someone you admired and believing in you, both financially and backing you up.
Well, we all have to eat and sleep somewhere, and my father offered to pay the rent for a while and help feed my family. That lasted about 6 months at the beginning, so that was the form of the funding for our first effort together. And, that was critical, but as you say, both in terms of for the necessities of life, but also for the faith and the spirit, which is another key ingredient of helping any of us have the gumption to go give it a try. So one amazing example of entrepreneurship is the Apollo 13 story. Backdrop being the whole let's go to the moon project in the 60s was itself very aspirational and fantastic, but hugely organized and funded and all that. Apollo 13 had an accident, and on the way back from the moon, it was clear that if they didn't do something, they're going to run out of breathable air. I don't know if you've seen the movie or not.
I didn't quite.
So check out, you go see this movie. It's a great movie. And so what happened is they assembled a group in Houston at Mission Control of, this is the truly entrepreneurial part, a group of engineers who recreated the situation of Apollo 13 over the course of 24 hours. They had to set up the situation to mimic what was wrong with the spacecraft and which systems had failed. And it was essentially, as I recall, around the thing that scrubbed out the carbon dioxide from the air that the astronauts were breathing. And it was broken. And they put together with duct tape and bits and pieces of the aircraft and just the flotsam and jetsam of, they had to sit there all through the night, it was an all-nighter, using stuff that was in the capsule that they had recreated in Houston to put together a primitive, jerry-rigged carbon dioxide scrubber that would last long enough to get them from partway back from the moon to Earth. And all we heard as citizens in America, people watching TV, was, there have been some problems on the aircraft and they're hoping to make it back. What was really happening is this thing, they were going to die on the way back. And this team, over a few hours on Earth, simulated the situation, and they were duct taping this and that together. Amazingly inspirational and totally entrepreneurial spirit. How do we go get something done, solve a problem, create a solution out of what we have at hand? And so from that point of view, that to me is classic entrepreneurship and so inspirational.
So inspirational. And it's interesting when you think about the one difference between the people in the aircraft and the ones in Houston is that the ones in Houston knew they were not going to die.
Right.
So they had this calm that they could operate with.
Yes.
And that might have been the difference in actually thinking things straight, whereas when you're in the aircraft, you're thinking, okay, I don't know if you can think straight. You know,
Yeah.
when you're in that kind of pressure situation, it's almost.
It was, although to be fair, there was a bit of stress on the guys in Houston because their buddies were up in this aircraft and they knew if they didn't fix it, they weren't gonna make it. But they did, you know, it is an example of, they did keep their heads about them and decide, you know, what we can do is what we have at hand. I mean, what we get to work with is what we have at hand and an amount of time to work with, and let's go make it happen. And a whole bunch of other stuff falls away in the interest of when you have the clarity of here's what I have to work with and here's the time I have to work with. And it's often, you know, to me, analogous with what it's like to start up a company.
That's pretty. What's the next big thing? What do you think is coming around the pike here that will dominate our senses, if you will?
You know, there are two answers to that. One category of answer is around new technologies like big data or mobile or cloud computing, stuff like that. What I think of more is that the barrier to entry for entrepreneurs, for startups, for new projects has almost been obliterated. That's the biggest new thing to me, is that there's going to continue to be, there already is this blossoming or just amazing proliferation of new projects, startups, efforts. It's because the technology is inexpensive to do it. You don't need a huge capital investment to get started. So to me, that's what I would call just the flowering of entrepreneurism is now enabled by the environment we're in, and all the tools and technologies enabling things that that used to be, you know, you needed to raise $5 million just to get started. You don't anymore.
That is exciting, yeah, and we're seeing that happening all over the United States and maybe even the world, with a lot of higher education institutions implementing entrepreneur academic programs. We've got a program here at UCSB called TMP. City College has the Scheinfeld Center. I know Westmont is starting something up within the entrepreneurship realm. Do you think that this is something that needs to be handled at the local level from an educational point of view, or do you think the cities, counties, states, and possibly federal government needs to be involved to really fuel entrepreneurship?
I think it's probably both. I am associated with UCSB and their technology management program, and RightScale is a supporter of those programs out there. They have some fantastic programs that encourage entrepreneurship at the university level. It's a great home for it because you've got lots of resources in terms of mentors, again, in the form of teachers and professors, helping to teach some of the blocking and tackling rules. I know one of our colleagues, advisors, investors, John Greathouse out there is a great resource to help from that point of view. I also think, you know, there's probably a role for government in providing tax incentives and funding. You know, the SBA has been out there for a long time doing that. I also think there's a third area, which is just learning on the street, and that any kind of formal program has to go hand in hand with individuals saying, I'm going to go out and figure out how to do this. I don't believe it's something that you can solely learn in a classroom, in a course. It's something that you need to go out and get traction doing yourself. Many of the programs at UCSB encourage that. They have, for example, a capstone project in the computer science area where students organize themselves into teams and they go build a product as if they were a startup. That's super valuable experience, and I think nothing's ever going to completely replace or supplant the internal spirit that we all have as human beings. That's the core entrepreneurial spirit of let's go try something, let's take a risk, and let's figure out how to make it happen through just day-to-day smarts and creativity.
Absolutely, and that's one of the things we're hoping to provide with Sign Up for Entrepreneur, that ability at the street level to get some guidance and some mentorship, matching, and things like that. Have you did say earlier that RightScale was bootstrapped?
Yes.
And so compare bootstrapping versus going out and raising capital. That's one of the biggest questions that a startup has to ask themselves. Advice either way? Is there a better way? How would you approach that problem?
The first problem I would try and solve is figuring out the basic nuts and bolts of the business, which are really separate from the funding. So to me, whether you bootstrap it or go raise money is secondary to what's the business going to be, who are the customers that you're serving, what pain do you solve for them, which is another way of saying what's the value that you're providing to them. And if you get that figured out, you can, what will come out of that, I believe, is what choices you have about whether you need to bootstrap it or can bootstrap it, or whether you need some funding. Of course, there's huge variation. If you're going to go invent a new drug, you need to do a lot of testing, field testing and trials and stuff. There's no way around the fact that that's capital intensive. But for many other businesses, you can kind of get it going. And the other part of that observation is that if you are going to raise money, one of the discussions will be about the valuation of your company at whatever stage it's at in relation to the investment, right? So you'd like that to be as high as possible if you're the entrepreneur. One of the key ways to get it as high as possible is to have made it farther down the road on the basics that I outlined: the business model, customers, what they want, proof that you have something working, and proof that people are using it, paying for it, etc. All of that goes a long way toward not only helping the business succeed, but creating value that investors will recognize when they do invest.
Good advice. And lastly, if there's one thing you wish that you knew starting out, whether it's in your late 20s when you started eFax, or even in the last 10 years, what's the one takeaway that you would impart to a young entrepreneur starting their career?
I wish I had understood a little bit better that a lot of business is really pretty humble and basic, and there's a lot of honor and effectiveness in paying attention to basic day-to-day details of what you're doing, and understanding the details of your business, taking concern for every initial customer, what's working for them, what's not, being involved at that level, and not feeling like you should be operating at some more higher silver screen level. That would have been a very healthy understanding. I think sometimes we picture ourselves, and even the label entrepreneur is kind of a label or a concept that we all may have pictures about. It's really, again, as you said at the beginning, it's about delivering value to people with a product or a service and understanding what's involved there. And once you're really focused on the details of that, it's actually a wonderful journey. Because again, you're involved with people, with customers, with companies, you're making a difference for them, and it helps everyone move forward. So I wish I had understood and been comfortable a little bit more with the humbleness of all that.
Well, thank you so much. Appreciate it. It means a lot that you share your insights and your experience with the community. So thank you.
Thanks for doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
Good luck.